The Galactic Military Academy stood on a world called Valar Prime, and it was the most famous training ground in all the known systems. A place where young soldiers from over 200 different species came to learn the art of war and strategy and survival in a universe that was not always kind to the weak. Kethron was a Veloci, which meant he had pale blue scales that covered his entire body, and 4 arms that could move with perfect coordination. And he had trained at the academy for nearly 2 years now, learning alongside cadets from species that had conquered stars and built empires that spanned entire galaxies. He had seen Thuan warriors who stood 3 meters tall and could crush stone with their bare hands, and he had trained with Melvari strategists whose forearms and enhanced reflexes made them deadly in close combat. And he had even shared meals with the strange and silent Din, who communicated through colors that rippled across their skin. Them had ever made him afraid, not truly afraid in the way that made his scales want to flatten against his body, and his hearts beat faster in his chest. Then the humans arrived, and everything changed. The first Earthborn cadet assigned to Kethron's training unit was a female named Emma Santos. And when he first saw her walking through the silver gates of the academy, he felt something close to pity for the poor creature. She was small by galactic standards, standing barely tall enough to reach the chest of a Thuan warrior, and her skin was soft and pink, and completely unprotected by scales or armor, or any natural defense that evolution should have provided. She had no claws on her fingers, no venom in her teeth, no ability to change colors or emit defensive chemicals, or do any of the 1,000 things that other species use to stay alive in dangerous situations. Her species had only discovered faster-than-light travel 3 generations ago. Practically infants compared to civilizations that had been sailing between stars for 100,000 years. The Veloci elders had pitied the humans when first contact was made, seeing them as fragile creatures who had somehow stumbled into a universe far too dangerous for being so poorly equipped for survival. But there was something about Emma Santos that made Kethran uneasy from the very first moment he saw her. It was the way she moved through the training corridors, with her eyes constantly scanning every doorway and shadow, looking for threats that did not exist in the safety of the academy walls, as if some part of her brain could never truly accept that she was not in danger. It was how the older instructors watched her when she passed, veterans of terrible wars who had seen entire planets burn and species driven to extinction, and the look in their eyes was not pity or amusement, but something that looked disturbingly like respect. Most of all was the strange markings that covered her arms whenever her sleeves pulled back during training exercises. Raised tissue that stood out from her skin in thick lines and ridges, and discolored patches where the flesh had healed in colors different from the rest of her body, and what appeared to be intentional patterns of dark ink embedded beneath her skin in shapes that meant nothing to Kethran, but clearly meant something to her. "Those are combat marks," whispered Veth one evening as they watched Emma cross the training yard, his voice dropping low, as if he was afraid she might somehow hear them from 50 meters away. Veth was a fellow Veloci, slightly older than Kethran, and always eager to share gossip and rumors that he collected from the other cadets, like precious gems. "Combat marks?" Kethran asked, not understanding. "The Earthborn carry their battles on their bodies," Veth explained, his neck frills pressing flat against his skull in a display of unease that Kethran had rarely seen from his friend. Every wound they receive leaves a permanent mark on their skin, and they keep those marks forever as some kind of record or memorial. Kethran could not understand why any species would do such a thing, because when a Veloci was injured, their scales regenerated perfectly within a few weeks, leaving no trace of the damage that had been done. Scars were something that only the most primitive species retained, creatures whose bodies had not yet evolved the ability to heal themselves properly. Why would they keep such things? He asked, genuinely confused by the idea. Surely their medical technology is advanced enough to remove the marks if they wanted to. Vet's neck frills flattened even further, and his voice dropped to barely a whisper. No one knows why they keep them, but the instructors say we should never ask about them, and we should never comment on them, and most importantly, we should never ever touch them. Kethron wanted to laugh at the warning, because what could possibly be dangerous about touching a scar on a creature half his size, who had no natural weapons or defenses? But something in Vet's eyes stopped him, a genuine fear that seemed completely out of proportion to the subject they were discussing. Over the following days, Kethron found himself watching Emma Santos more and more closely, trying to understand what it was about this small, soft creature that made everyone around her so cautious. He noticed that she woke before dawn every morning to run laps around the academy grounds, pushing her body through exercises that seemed designed to cause pain rather than build strength. He noticed that she ate her meals alone most of the time, not because the other cadets avoided her, but because she seemed to prefer the solitude, her eyes always watching the room around her, even as she focused on her food. He noticed that when the training simulations became difficult, and other cadets began to slow down or ask for rest, Emma Santos simply kept going, her face showing pain, but her body refusing to stop, until the instructors ordered her to stand down. And he noticed the other human who had been assigned to the academy, a tall male named Ryan Cole, whose combat marks were even more extensive than Emma's. A thick line of raised tissue ran from Ryan's jaw all the way down to his collarbone, and circular marks dotted his forearms in patterns that looked almost deliberate, and across his back was a massive patch of mottled, discolored skin that looked like it had been melted and reformed into something barely resembling normal flesh. "That is a shrapnel scar," one of the Foon cadets had muttered when they saw Ryan changing into his training gear, and the massive insectoid warrior had sounded almost reverent as he said the words. The Earthborn received that wound from an explosive device. Understand why a Thuan would sound respectful about such a thing. Because the Thuan were legendary throughout the galaxy for their ability to endure pain and keep fighting through injuries that would kill most other species. What could possibly impress a Thuan about a human's scars? He did not know the answer yet, but he was determined to find out, even if the search led him somewhere he was not prepared to go. Weeks passed at the Galactic Military Academy, and Kethron found himself assigned to the same tactical simulation group as both Emma Santos and Ryan Cole, which gave him plenty of opportunities to observe the strange Earthborn cadets up close. The simulation groups were designed to mix species together so that cadets could learn to work alongside allies who thought and moved and fought in completely different ways, because the galaxy was full of threats that required cooperation between civilizations that had little in common. Kethron's group included two other Veloci, a massive Thuan warrior named Grath, who rarely spoke, but whose presence alone was enough to make most enemies hesitate, and three Melvari cadets, whose forearms and enhanced reflexes made them excellent at tasks requiring coordination and speed. And then there were the two humans, Emma and Ryan, who by every measurement the Academy used should have been the weakest members of the team. Not the strongest cadets, because even a child from the Thun homeworld could have lifted both humans off the ground with one arm. They were not the fastest cadets, because the Melvari could move with a speed that made them blur in the vision of slower species. Their reflexes were average at best, their natural weapons completely non-existent, and their bodies were so fragile that a single blow from a Thun fist would have shattered their bones like dry branches. By every metric the Academy instructors used to measure combat potential, the humans should have ranked at the very bottom of every list, but somehow they did not. Emma Santos scored in the top 3% of all cadets for tactical adaptation, which was the ability to change strategies in the middle of a battle when the original plan fell apart, and her scores were so high that some of the instructors had requested she be moved to advanced classes meant for cadets with years more experience. Ryan Cole held the Academy record for endurance under simulated torture conditions, which was a test designed to measure how long a cadet could resist interrogation while experiencing carefully controlled levels of pain and psychological pressure. The previous record had been held by a Thun veteran who had lasted 6 hours before the instructors ended the simulation. Ryan Cole had lasted 10 hours, 4 hours beyond what any other species had ever achieved, and the instructors had been forced to manually end the test because they were concerned about the psychological effects on the cadets, who were monitoring his vital signs. When asked afterward how he had managed to endure so long, Ryan had simply shrugged his shoulders and said, "You get used to it," in a voice that suggested he genuinely meant those words. The phrase haunted Kethron for days afterward, echoing in his mind whenever he tried to sleep. What kind of species got used to torture? What kind of evolutionary path created beings who could adapt to pain the way other species adapted to changes in temperature or gravity? Driven by curiosity that he could not ignore, Kethron began spending his free time in the Academy archives, researching Earth and its dominant species in databases that contained information gathered from thousands of years of galactic exploration. What he found disturbed him in ways he had not expected. Humans had spent their entire evolutionary history as prey animals on a world that seemed designed to kill them in as many ways as possible. Their planet was covered in predators with claws and teeth and venom, in natural disasters that could destroy entire regions without warning, in diseases that could spread through populations like fire through dry grass. The humans themselves had no claws, no venom, no natural armor, no ability to fly or swim at high speeds or see in the dark that other prey species used to escape from predators. They were slower than the animals that hunted them, weaker than the competitors who fought them for resources, and their young took years to mature into adults capable of defending themselves. By all biological logic, they should have gone extinct millions of years ago. Just another failed experiment in the endless process of evolution. Instead, they had done something that no other prey species in galactic history had ever accomplished. They had hunted their predators to extinction, every single one of them. The archives contained images and records of human history, and Kethron spent hours scrolling through information that made his scales itch with discomfort. He saw their wars, conflicts that spanned their entire planet and killed millions of their own kind in battles fought over territory and resources, and ideas that seemed incomprehensible to outside observers. Designed to kill, that grew more sophisticated and more deadly with each generation, from simple clubs and spears to explosive devices that could destroy entire cities in a single flash of light. He saw their capacity for violence, not just against other species, but against each other, brother against brother and nation against nation, in endless cycles of conflict that never seemed to truly end. Kethron had studied species that glorified combat, like the Krethian berserkers, who believed that dying in battle was the only honorable way to leave existence. He had learned about the Vorn blood cults, who ritually scarred themselves to prove their devotion to their warrior gods. The humans were different from all of them in a way that took Kethron a long time to understand. They did not glory in violence, or worship war as something sacred and beautiful. They simply refused to stop. When other species faced overwhelming odds, they would retreat or surrender, or accept that some battles could not be won, because survival was more important than victory, and living to fight another day was better than dying for a cause that was already lost. Humans did not seem to have that instinct, that voice in their minds that told them when a situation was hopeless and it was time to give up. They would keep fighting when they were outnumbered and outgunned and bleeding from wounds that should have killed them, and they would keep fighting until either they won or they died trying. and sometimes they would keep fighting even after they should have been dead. The archives contained a human saying that Kethron read over and over again, trying to understand what it meant. It is not the size of the dog in the fight that matters, but the size of the fight in the dog. He was not entirely sure what a dog was, but he thought he understood the meaning. And that understanding made him look at Emma Santos and Ryan Cole in a completely different way, seeing not the soft, fragile creatures he had pitied when they first arrived, but something far more dangerous hiding behind those calm and patient eyes. The incident that changed everything happened during a joint combat exercise in the Academy's zero-gravity training arena, a massive sphere of reinforced metal where cadets could practice fighting in the weightless conditions they might encounter on starships or space stations. Catherine's team had been assigned to face a squad of Melvari cadets in a capture-the-flag-style exercise, and everyone expected the Melvari to win easily, because their species had evolved on a low-gravity world, and they moved through weightless environments like they were born for it. The Melvari were tall and graceful, with 4 arms that could grab and push and pull in multiple directions at once, and their spatial awareness was legendary throughout the galaxy, allowing them to track objects and enemies in 3-dimensional space with a precision that other species could only dream of achieving. Catherine's team had practiced for days trying to develop strategies that might give them a chance, and they knew they were about to face their biggest test yet. But even Grath the Thun had admitted that their odds of victory were not good. "We will fight with honor," the massive warrior had said in his deep rumbling voice, "but we should not expect to win this battle." Emma Santos had listened to these words without expression, her face as calm and unreadable as it always was, and then she had asked a simple question: why not? Grath had looked at her with what might have been confusion, though it was hard to read emotions on a Thun's insectoid face. "Because the Melvari are superior to us in this environment," he explained as if speaking to a child who did not understand basic facts. "Their bodies are designed for zero gravity, and ours are not." Emma had nodded slowly, and then she had smiled in a way that made Kethron's scales prickle with sudden unease. "Then we will have to be smarter than our bodies," she said, and she began explaining a strategy that no one else had considered. Began the next day, and Kethron found himself moving through the zero-gravity arena in a formation that Emma had designed, using the walls and obstacles as cover, while Ryan Cole led a distraction team on the opposite side of the sphere. The Melvari moved beautifully, their 4 arms propelling them through the space with graceful efficiency, and they quickly located Ryan's team and began pursuing them with the confidence of predators who knew they were faster than their prey. But that was exactly what Emma had planned. While the Melvari chased Ryan's team in circles around the arena, Emma led Kethron and 2 others on a direct path toward the enemy flag, using a route that passed through a section of the arena filled with obstacles that blocked line of sight. By the time the Melvari realized what was happening, Emma had already grabbed their flag and was pushing off the far wall with her legs, launching herself back toward friendly territory with the prize clutched against her chest. The Melvari tried to intercept her, but Ryan's team had repositioned to block their path, and Grath used his massive body to create a barrier that even the fastest Melvari could not easily pass. When the final score was tallied, Kethran's team had won by a significant margin, and the Melvari cadets were left floating in confused silence, trying to understand how they had lost to a team that should not have been able to compete with them. In the aftermath of the exercise, as cadets drifted toward the exit in the low gravity, Kethran found himself floating beside Emma Santos near one of the observation windows. Her sleeve had torn during the exercise, ripped open by a grab from one of the Melvari cadets who had tried to stop her escape, and the damage exposed the combat marks on her forearm in a way that Kethran had never seen before. Up close, the marks were even more disturbing than he had imagined. Layers of scar tissue that Ryan's sagging might have embellished. Overlapped and intersected in patterns that told a story of violence he could not fully understand. Some of the scars were old and faded, the raised tissue smoothed down by years of healing, while others were still pink and fresh, recent additions to the collection that covered her skin. There were thin lines that might have come from blades, and rough patches that looked like burns, and small circular marks that Catherine did not recognize, but which seemed to follow a pattern. "What are those?" he asked before he could stop himself, the words leaving his mouth before his brain had time to remind him of Veth's warning. Emma glanced down at her arm, and her expression did not change, remaining as calm and neutral as it always was. "This one is from a knife fight when I was 17, she said, pointing to a long, thin scar that ran from her wrist toward her elbow. "That one is a bullet graze from my first deployment overseas, and the burn mark is from a chemical spill during basic training." She recited the injuries like she was reading a list of items she needed to buy at a store, her voice flat and emotionless, as if these wounds that should have ended her life were nothing more than minor inconveniences she had experienced along the way. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, Catherine reached out with one of his smaller arms and touched the raised tissue of the knife scar, wanting to feel what it was like, wanting to understand how skin could heal so imperfectly. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Emma's hand shot out faster than Catherine's eyes could follow, and locked around his wrist with a grip that felt like metal bands closing around his scales, and her eyes, which had been calm and distant, suddenly focused on him with an intensity that made every instinct in his body scream at him to run. It was the look of a predator, not prey. It was the look of something that had killed before, and would kill again without hesitation if the situation required it. It was the look of a species that had hunted its own predators to extinction, and had never forgotten how. Around them, the other cadets had frozen in place, Melvari and Thune and Veloci, all hanging motionless in the zero gravity. And the silence that fell over the arena was so complete that Catherine could hear his own heart's pounding in his chest. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the predator behind Emma's eyes retreated, and she released his wrist. "Sorry," she said, her voice returning to its normal calm tone, as if nothing had happened. Reflex. She pushed off the wall and drifted away toward the exit, leaving Catherine floating in the middle of the arena with his wrists still tingling from the pressure of her grip. He looked around at the other cadets, expecting to see confusion or perhaps mockery at his foolishness. Instead, he saw only fear. The Thune warrior Grath, who could have torn Catherine apart with his bare hands, was staring after Emma with his mandibles pressed tight against his face, in an expression of deep unease. The Melvari cadets, who had just lost a battle they should have won, were clustering together, as if seeking safety in numbers. Even his fellow Veloci were watching the exit where Emma had disappeared, with their neck frills flattened in the ancient fear response of their species. No one spoke, no one moved, and in that silence, Catherine began to understand that he had stumbled onto something far more significant than a simple reflex from a startled soldier. That evening, Catherine went to find Senior Instructor Velnak, an elderly Veloci female who had served alongside humans during the Boundary Wars nearly 40 years ago, and who was one of the few non-human officers in the entire galaxy who had earned the right to wear an Earthborn unit patch on her uniform. Her office was located in the oldest section of the Academy, a building that had stood for 3,000 years, and had seen cadets from hundreds of species pass through its doors on their way to becoming soldiers and leaders and legends. Catherine had never been inside the building before, and as he walked through the ancient corridors, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. All those generations of warriors who had trained here and gone on to fight in wars that shaped the destiny of entire civilizations. Velnak's door was open when he arrived, and she was sitting behind a desk covered in holographic displays and paper documents that seemed impossibly old, and she looked up at him, with eyes that had seen things Kethron could not imagine. "You touched her combat marks," she said before Kethron could speak, her voice flat and knowing. "I watched the security footage from the training arena, and I must say, you are very fortunate to still have that arm attached to your body." Kethron felt his scales flush with embarrassment and something else, something that might have been shame. "I do not understand," he said, taking a step into the office, but not daring to sit down without permission. "She is half my size, and her species has no natural weapons, so how could she possibly have harmed me in any real way?" Velnak stared at him for a long moment, and then she gestured to a chair in front of her desk. "Sit down, young one, because this is going to take some time to explain." Kethron sat. The old instructor pulled up a holographic display showing human anatomical data, rotating images of their skeletal structure and muscular system, and nervous pathways that spread through their bodies like the roots of a tree. "The Earthborn are what xenobiologists call persistence predators," Velnak began, her voice taking on the tone of a teacher who had given this lesson many times before. "Do you know what that term means?" "They chase their prey until it collapses from exhaustion," Kethran answered, remembering what he had read in the archives. "They cannot outrun most animals over short distances, but they can keep moving for longer than almost any other creature on their planet." "Correct, but that is not the frightening part of their biology." Velnak highlighted the human nervous system on the display, zooming in on the complex web of signals that connected their brain to every part of their body. Their bodies are designed to continue functioning under levels of damage that would completely incapacitate any other known species in the galaxy. Explained. They can lose entire limbs and keep fighting for extended periods. They can suffer injuries that would kill a Thun warrior from shock alone, and their bodies will flood with chemicals that allow them to ignore the pain entirely. She zoomed in further on the scar tissue that Kethran had touched, showing how human skin healed in layers that were actually stronger than the original flesh. "These marks that cover their bodies are not weaknesses as you might assume," Velnak continued. "They are warnings, signals to anyone intelligent enough to read them correctly." "Warnings of what?" "Every scar on an Earthborn's body represents a wound that should have killed them and did not. Every mark is proof that they have already survived something that would have ended any of us. And the more scars they carry, the more dangerous they have proven themselves to be." Kethran thought about the scars he had seen on Ryan Cole during training, the shrapnel wound that covered his back, and the burns that marked his arms, and the dozens of smaller marks scattered across his skin like a map of violence. "How many times has he almost died?" he whispered, not really expecting an answer. "That human male you train with?" Velnak pulled up Ryan's Academy medical file, scrolling through page after page of documented injuries and treatments. "Based on his visible scarring alone, our medical staff estimates he has survived at least 47 wounds that would have been fatal to a Veloci or equivalent species." Kethran felt his heart skip in their rhythm. 47 near-death experiences, he repeated, trying to make the number feel real. "And he is only 26 years old by human counting," Velnak added, "which is barely into adulthood for their species." She closed the medical file and leaned back in her chair, studying Kethran with eyes that held memories of battles he would never see. "Wars? I served in a mixed unit that included a squad of human Marines," she said, her voice growing softer. "I was young then, not much older than you are now, and I thought I understood what war was and what soldiers could endure." "What happened?" "We were ambushed by Krethian raiders on a moon with no atmosphere, and our position was overrun within the first few minutes of the attack. And I watched 3 of my Veloci companions die before I could even reach for my weapon." Velnak's neck frills pressed flat against her skull as she remembered. The human squad leader was a female named Grace, and she had been hit by a Krethian blade that opened her stomach, and spilled her internal organs onto the ground, and by every medical standard I knew, she should have died within seconds from shock and blood loss. But she did not die, Catherine said, already knowing where the story was going. She held her organs inside her body with one hand and kept firing her weapon with the other, and she killed 11 Krethian raiders before the battle was over. And when the medics finally reached her, she was still conscious and asking about the status of her unit. Velnak met Catherine's eyes with a gaze that burned with intensity. She survived, young one, and she served for another 15 years before retiring, and the scar from that wound is still visible on her body, because she chose to keep it as a reminder of what she had overcome. Catherine sat in silence, trying to process everything he had heard. When you touched Emma Santos in that arena, Velnak concluded, you triggered reflexes that have been built into human nervous systems over millions of years of evolution, on one of the most dangerous planets in the known galaxy. Reflexes designed to neutralize threats before the conscious mind even has time to recognize them. She could have killed me, Catherine said. She could have killed you before you even realized. You were in danger, Velnak corrected. The fact that she stopped herself is a testament to her training and her control, not to any limitation in her abilities. The old instructor stood and walked to her window, looking out at the academy grounds, where cadets from dozens of species were going about their evening routines. Remember what you have learned today, young one, and remember it well, because the humans are our allies now, and we should all be grateful for that fact. Kethron nodded slowly, his mind still spinning with the weight of new understanding. What would it be like, he asked quietly, if they were our enemies instead? Velnak did not turn around, but her voice carried clearly across the office. Pray to whatever gods your people believe in, that we never have to find out. The next morning, Kethron sat alone in the academy mess hall, his food untouched on the tray in front of him, his mind still processing everything that senior instructor Velnak had told him the night before. Around him, the mess hall was filled with the sounds of cadets from a dozen different species, eating and talking and laughing, the normal morning chaos of young soldiers preparing for another day of training and learning and pushing their bodies and minds to the limits. But Kethron could not focus on any of it, could not make himself care about the food, or the noise, or the routine that had defined his life for the past 2 years. All he could think about was the look in Emma's eyes when she had grabbed his wrist, that flash of something ancient and dangerous that had appeared for just a moment before disappearing behind her calm and patient expression. At the far end of the mess hall, he spotted Emma Santos and Ryan Cole sitting together at a small table. And with them was a third human, who must have arrived at the academy in the last few days, a female named Katie Price, whose face told a story of violence that made Catherine's heart ache with sympathy. Burn scars covered the entire left side of Katie's face. The flesh melted and reformed into ridges and valleys that no amount of reconstructive surgery could ever fully repair. And her left eye was a prosthetic replacement that glowed faintly with internal circuitry. She was laughing at something Ryan had said, her scarred face twisted into an expression of genuine joy that seemed completely disconnected from the horrific injuries she had suffered. Catherine watched as a Thun cadet approached their table, the massive insectoid warrior bowing his head in a gesture of respect before sitting down across from the 3 humans. It was Grath, the same Thun who had been on Catherine's training team during the zero-gravity exercise, and he was listening intently to whatever story Katie was telling, his mandibles clicking softly in what Kethran now recognized as an expression of admiration rather than unease. The 4 of them looked comfortable together, predators sharing a meal without any of the tension that should have existed between species so different from one another. Veth appeared beside Kethran's table and slid into the seat across from him, his neck frills pressed flat in the same expression of unease that had become familiar over the past few weeks. You touched the Earthborn's combat marks yesterday, Vex said, his voice barely above a whisper, even though there was no one close enough to overhear them. I did, Kethran admitted, not bothering to deny what everyone in the academy probably already knew. And now you understand why the cadets fell silent when it happened. Kethran looked at his friend, then back at the table where the three humans were eating breakfast with Grath, and he thought about everything he had learned in the archives, and everything Velnok had told him, and everything he had seen with his own 4 eyes. We were not silent because we feared what she might do to me, he said slowly, the realization forming in his mind as he spoke the words. We were silent because in that moment we all realized what those marks truly meant. Veth waited for him to continue, his frills twitching with curiosity. Every species in this academy has something that makes them dangerous, Kethron explained, gesturing around the mess hall at the cadets of various species who filled the room. The Thune have their incredible strength and their armor that can stop most weapons, and the Melvari have their reflexes and their ability to see threats coming before anyone else. He held up his own 4 arms. We have our venom and our numbers, and our ability to coordinate in ways that other species find difficult to match. And every civilization that has survived long enough to reach the stars has some advantage that allowed them to overcome the challenges of their homeworld. And the humans? Veth asked. Kethran looked back at Emma Santos, watching as she took a bite of her food with one hand, while the other rested casually on the table. The combat marks on her forearms clearly visible to anyone who cared to look. The humans have none of those things, he said. They have no natural weapons and no armor and no venom. Their reflexes are average, and their strength is unremarkable, and their senses are nothing special compared to most other species. Then what do they have? They have only one advantage, and it is an advantage that no other species in the galaxy seems to possess. Kethran turned to face Veth directly, meeting his friend's eyes with all 4 of his own. They do not stop, they do not surrender, and they do not die when they are supposed to die. He thought about Ryan Cole enduring 10 hours of simulated torture, 4 hours longer than any Thune had ever managed, simply because he had decided that he would not break. He thought about the human Marine, Grace, who had held her own organs inside her body with one hand, while killing 11 enemy raiders with the other. He thought about Emma's reflexes in the training arena, faster than his eyes could follow, honed by millions of years of evolution on a planet that had tried everything it could to kill her ancestors and had failed. Every other species in the galaxy evolved to survive by avoiding damage, Kethran continued. We developed armor and speed and venom and 1,000 other adaptations designed to keep us from being hurt in the first place, because being hurt meant dying, and dying meant failure. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. The humans evolved differently, because their planet gave them no choice but to take damage and keep going anyway, and their bodies adapted not to avoid injury, but to survive injury, to keep functioning when any other creature would have given up and accepted death. Across the mess hall, Ryan Cole rolled up his sleeve to show Grath something on his forearm, and the Thuan warrior leaned in close to study whatever mark Ryan was displaying, his mandibles clicking in an unmistakable expression of respect. Those scars are not reminders of what hurt them, Kethran said quietly, watching the exchange between human and Thuan. They are trophies, proof of everything that tried to kill them and failed. Veth was silent for a long moment, processing everything Kethran had said. I am glad they are our allies, he finally said. Kethran thought about human history, about the wars they had fought against each other for thousands of years, about the weapons they had built that could destroy entire planets, about the predators they had hunted to extinction, and the environments they had conquered, and the challenges they had overcome through nothing but stubbornness and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. He thought about what it would mean to face such a species in battle, to fight against enemies who would never surrender, and never retreat, and never stop coming, no matter how many of them you killed. So am I, he said, because I cannot imagine what it would be like to have them as enemies. At the far table, Emma Santos glanced up from her meal, and for just a moment, her eyes met Kethran's across the crowded mess hall. She nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement that might have been forgiveness for what he had done in the arena, or might have been something else entirely. Then she went back to her breakfast, the combat marks on her arms catching the light as she moved, each scar a testament to a death that had been denied, each mark a warning to anyone foolish enough to think that humans were weak simply because they were soft. Kethran finally picked up his food and began to eat, but he kept watching the table where the three humans sat with their Thune companion, and he made himself a promise that he would never forget what he had learned. The galaxy was full of dangerous species, creatures with claws and fangs and venom and strength beyond imagination. But the most dangerous species of all was the one that looked the weakest, the one that carried its battles on its skin like medals of honor, the one that had learned to survive not by avoiding pain, but by embracing it and refusing to let it stop them. The Earthborn were allies now, partners in the great work of building a peaceful galaxy where all species could thrive together. And every other civilization in known space should get down on their knees every single day and thank whatever gods they believed in that this was true. Because the alternative was too terrible to imagine.